Good evening. We are Chris Lee, Blake Lovell, and Blayne Gilmer here to talk about the aftermath of SEC Media Days. The season is upon us, guys. Vanderbilt starting practice for week 0 next week. Blake and I were at Media Days all week in our backyard of Nashville. Blayne watched a lot of it from his home in Georgia. Gentlemen, this is sort of always the unofficial start of the college football season or the SEC football season in the eyes of some. And goodness, Blake, you and I were in that building. We saw anybody and everybody, and we certainly had a lot of things to take away from SEC Media Days.
A lot of things to take away. Lane Kiffin hates NIL.
Or does he?
I think of what else that's we have.
Oh, he does.
Yeah, he's what do you call it? A disaster, I think. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it all becomes a blur after day 4, and we talked about. I think we've got 38 player interviews in total going up on the channel at some point. Some will go up tomorrow, but yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, I mean, you learn a lot, but at the same time, I think you hear what you know you're going to hear, and we'll let fall camp determine everything else, I think. So,
yeah, I thought it was interesting just to hear. I know y'all are talking about Lane Kiffin railing on NIL, but certainly they've been able to utilize it themselves a little bit over there. So I think, he stands on the table a little bit on that kind of stuff and talks about, hey, this is great for college. It's basically the college kids and parents. It's basically free agency every year, that kind of stuff. So I did think that was a little bit interesting there, but we'll see. We'll see where it ends up going.
Yeah, I wrote down some things that were repeated points of emphasis or storylines, whatever. I've got really 4 or 5 categories we'll go into, but let's start with Greg Sankey. He led off the event. And Blake, I think one thing that stuck out to us, Greg Sankey really, once he got into the meat of his conversation, he did the obligatory, we've won this, we've won that, and thank you to the people in Nashville who attended to the Covenant shooting and all those things. But once he got past the political point of his opening, he went right into NIL, and he did not pull a lot of punches, and he spent, by my count, about 11 minutes talking about all that, and basically throughout that pleading with Congress to help.
all right, Chris, I'm going to call an audible here. We're going to send that one to Blayne, and I'm going to reload this thing to get my audio working, and I will be back shortly because it couldn't be a Southeastern 14 live stream without a technical issue. So
when you're
Blayne,
live, nothing can go wrong.
I'll be back.
Listen, when you're live, nothing can go wrong. It just changes. You know what I'm saying? That's how that goes. Right. Nothing goes wrong. It just changes. But no, I mean, I don't know how people across the spectrum are going to feel about Greg Sankey calling out for help from Congress, Chris, because that's typically not a place where things move too quickly. So I'm not sure how quickly NIL will get resolved if they're dependent on Congress. I think this is going to have to be more of a truly conference type deal. And I think this whole structure of the NCAA is going to have to change. Maybe have, Greg Sankey is quite the strong commissioner for the SEC. He's done a great job, but wouldn't it be almost better if there was a commissioner for all of college football and everybody adopted the same kind of a constitution, a collective bargaining agreement type deal, if you will? I think that would be the better result.
Yeah, I've thought for a while that all sports needed their own commissioner. We could get into a whole different show about that, I'm sure. But when you're begging Congress for help, I mean, that might be the one thing more incompetent than the NCAA. But the problem is you've got all this disparity in state laws and things like that. And I don't know the finer points of those things, but it was brought up time and time again. And it was interesting. Lane Kiffin is the guy who is the self-appointed portal king. And Lane Kiffin was the guy that probably spent more of his time than anyone complaining, although his complaints weren't necessarily about the uniformity of NIL as much as just the conditions, in particular the transfer portal and how guys can move in and out at will. Well, not at will. There's more guardrails around it. You get as he put it, you get you get one choice out of high school, you get another one-time transfer, and then you get a grad transfer. But as he said, a guy comes in, doesn't like the way you're coaching practice, doesn't like his position on the depth chart for a day, and he can leave it will. And of course, from Lane Kiffin, that was ironic because he almost left for Auburn last year, which is really how this got started in the first place.
We know why he didn't go to Auburn. Okay.
Right. Well, look, we're not going to get off the rails into that tonight, but point is that was one of the bigger points of emphasis. Some other things that came up, gambling was a big topic. Greg Sankey brought that up after spending about 11 minutes on NIL. He got into gambling and specifically mentioned player harassment. Now, when you talk to players individually, if that had happened to them, they did not admit to it, but apparently it's been an issue where that has come up, and I guess, some better somewhere lost a game, and guys heard about it on Twitter. That was another thing that you heard a lot about, was mental health and coaches having their guys stay off social media or deal with it some ways. That was a big topic. Blake, how many times do we hear questions asked of coaches or players in the aftermath of the Northwestern mess that resulted in Pat Fitzgerald's firing? Those were three of the bigger topics there. One thing that did surprise me, and maybe this is just a statement about where things are right now in college athletics, you didn't hear much at all. I mean, usually there's a lot of quarterback talk, like who's going to start at quarterback and those things. And you do have some battles certain places. That didn't come up. There was just so much other stuff that came up constantly. And one thing I was surprised we didn't hear more about was the Georgia AJC mess, which took a turn this week too. But it was interesting. Just those were the topics, Blake, that I thought dominated media day, from what Greg Sankey spoke to what the coaches and players were asked about.
Yeah, I mean, we knew it was going to be very NIL based, because I think at a certain point, and I don't know if I said this to you yesterday, at a certain point you hit what I like to call the coach speak wall. And, you're only going to get so much in terms of everything else. But I think, as everyone probably heard, it's the ones you get the most out of are the hot topics of the day or the era. And as we know, it's NIL, it's transfer portal, it's all that kind of stuff. And that's where you got the Lane Kiffin quotes and different stuff like that. I thought Brian Kelly had one of the more interesting ones. You and I were laughing about this, Chris, on, what was that, Monday? I think Brian Kelly and Eli Drinkwitz were both asked about AI in college football. And our expectation was that Drinkwitz was going to be the one that had this perhaps elaborate thought on, Missouri being able to use this somehow to their advantage, robots, all this other stuff. But it actually was reversed to where Brian Kelly was the one. It was very, detailed, I thought, in his response. And he's like, hey, we're going to kind of use this to maybe build a model of a player that we want. And we're going to, all this other stuff. And I was just fascinated by that. I know everyone's not into the AI stuff, but I can't say I'm totally into it, but I just thought it was interesting to hear, because we know it's kind of a big thing. So yeah, I mean, I didn't come out of this, with anything in particular in terms of changing my opinion about this one way or the other on this team or that team or anything, but we don't ever really expect that. I think it's interesting to hear the insight from coaches. Interesting to, I think, really just, to me, the insight from the players, because you don't get to hear the players all the time. Like, we hear the coaches every week, and not that they don't say good things, but I think just hearing some of the stuff from the players, you get kind of a unique take on certain things. And I thought there were several players for me, Chris, that stood out this week talking to them. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, because there were quite a few, but yeah, it was a fun week.
Before we hit the question quickly, I was going to say, well, you know what? I've forgotten my thought. Blayne, you go ahead. I'll hit that.
Well, I was just telling everybody, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So that's what our live streams are for. So if you are in here watching, go ahead and throw in your questions and comments. And we've got here from Leland Labordi, if I hope I pronounced that correct. Have any of you ever spoken to a coach that worked for Saban? If so, what was it like for them? I've been in press conferences and asked Kirby Smart questions, and I've heard him respond to what it was like working for not only Nick Saban, but also Bobby Bowden. He was a graduate assistant for Bobby Bowden, and his kind of comparison of those two. And he pretty much says that, hey, Nick is is just a hard-nosed guy that is going to, he's going to work hard. You're going to grind over there. There's an expectation of a level of effort that you have to put in. But at the end of the day, now you start to hear guys like Hugh Freeze, for example. He said when he was out of the game, I heard him in an interview this week. He said when he was kind of out of the game because of the situation that he went through with the whole deal at Ole Miss, he said Nick Saban was actually one of the guys that was his biggest encouragers and stayed in touch with him and things like that off the field. So I think Saban has this the football side demeanor, and then I think he's got a little bit different side of him as well, especially now that he's got the grandkids. Chris, I think old Papa Saban over there has gotten a little softer over the years, not as tough on everybody.
I've spoken to coaches who have worked for him, but before they did, the word when he first got there was, look, if your kid had a little league game or something like that and you were on the clock at Alabama, sorry, you know what you signed up for. And I think that's led to a lot of burnout on his staff. Now, like you said, he's a grandfather and some other things have changed, and you sense that he has softened up a little bit through the years. But that was one of the negatives about working for Nick Saban. I mean, look, you got to the height of your profession and you hear players talk about the process and in some ways how grateful they were for that, but they wouldn't necessarily want to go through it again. He is not the easiest guy to work for, but then again, sometimes the guys that are most successful are not.
Yeah, it's there's a standard, there's a standard that a lot of people have to meet, and you've got to decide a balance of life and a balance of home life and a balance of work. And really, I think some of the coaches kind of look at it as, hey, there's a shelf life on this deal, and you got to kind of, make hay while the sun's shining. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how it goes there. Blake, I mean, you ever talked to anybody that's worked for Saban?
Well, I can't recall off the top of my head, but I can tell you one thing about Nick Saban. We learned this week. Grandma Saban, I know, talked to Nick Saban quite a bit. And I think this was a good way to put it. It probably goes for the coaches that have coached for him, and it goes for this team. But what was it, Chris? Grandma Saban used to bake the cake, and he kept asking Grandma Saban, is it done yet? And he just, pestering it. Is the cake done yet? And that's when she told him, well, if I take it out of the oven too soon, it's going to turn to mush. And that's when he used the line that, I don't know why I just started thinking like Talladega Nights and Ricky Bobby and Shake and Bake and all this, but he used the line, we have to make sure we let the cake bake. So Cake and Bake is the theme for the Alabama Crimson Tide this season, courtesy of Nick Saban. And there you go.
Blake, let's coming your way. We will get merch. What is
Cake and Bake?
What is Nick Saban's favorite kind of cake?
Carrot cake, man.
Cake.
Carrot
That's
cake.
Easy. Yeah, that's what he said. Carrot cake. That's easy.
Carrot cake. That's easy.
So there was
man.
that.
Come on.
Yeah, that's one of the few questions that he's ever said was easy, I think, from a reporter.
Right. Blake, you said earlier that you didn't really change your mind on a lot of things, and I usually don't. I don't usually see media days as newsworthy, but I felt like there were a couple of things that I picked up on, and I'm not saying that my opinion is the right one. I'm just saying that, look, there's a pack of teams in this league. I see it. The league this year, you sort of got Alabama, LSU, Georgia up there in some order. I know the order that I'd put them in right now, but I could tell you the reasons why one of those teams could be 3, and I could tell you the same reason one of those teams could be 1, and we won't go into that right now. I think you've got, in my mind, probably Florida and Vanderbilt at the bottom, and then you've got a tier of teams in the middle between 4 and 12 that I think are all fairly competitive. Like, I would have tiers within there. I would probably put Tennessee higher, closer to 4 than I would 12 for sure. And we could go through some teams like that. But Texas A&M was a team that I had probably in contention for that 4 spot along with Tennessee. And one of the things that really stood out to me, Jimbo Fisher got a question, and he had to know it was coming. And I would have to think that he would have to think through the answer. And it was about offensive coordinator and Bobby Petrino and what I don't remember the nature of the question exactly, but it was basically like, are you going to give the keys to your offense to Bobby Petrino? And man, he hemmed and hawed and danced around it. And so, he didn't just hesitate. I didn't think
he said, I hope he ends up calling most of the plays.
I hope. I mean, who's the coach?
Exactly.
That to me sent off alarm bells. And maybe that's too much. Maybe we're making but I'm just thinking, you're a head coach, you won a national title, you were on the hot seat, you know what it's like in this league. How could you not be prepared for that question? And I have to think that the fact that he was not prepared for that, or I shouldn't say he wasn't prepared for the question. I just didn't like his answer.
Well, I mean, look, I'm willing to give them a chance to see how this unfolds, because I think we can obviously say there were times last season where it felt like it could not get much worse. Not just saying that on the offensive end, but we know they were disappointing last year, and I'm willing to give it a chance. But like you said, there wasn't really a straight answer when it came to that. And you've got two guys that have been head coaches and successful head coaches, and I think anytime you at a very high level, I think sometimes that can be sort of underrated when you look at it from that standpoint. Sure, you can have head coaches come in and work together, but when you have guys who have been at the top level, working together at that same time, I think it's very interesting, that dynamic. And we'll see, because again, these are two guys that have done what they've made their living off of their offenses. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to make too much of it just yet, but that was one that I think there's not a lot, like you said, that sort of catches you off guard, I think, in these kind of media day settings. But that was one that I think we all just kind of looked around and said, well, that was an interesting response. So, yeah, I can't deny that.
Well, Jimbo answered that way, but if you listen to some of Ainias Smith's interviews off stage and stuff like that, he pretty much said, looking forward to seeing Petrino as the offensive coordinator. So I think the players, I think it's just Jimbo's ego and pride getting in the way a little bit there, the thing, but I think he'll be fine. We got a couple more questions here. It says, this is from Sam Smith, help me understand why national media is higher on Joe Milton than the local Knoxville media. Seems like Joe was the talk of Nashville today. So you guys were there. What was your kind of vibe check of how people felt about Joe Milton? I for one was kind of surprised he was one of the representatives there for Tennessee, because I think there's a lot to prove there for him. So I think Heupel kind of was pushing all his chips in, saying, hey, we need to put a united front up, show that this is our guy.
Yeah, I'll give you, this is always sort of the answer for anything that's a local versus national regional issue, right? Fans are, and I'm not, a lot of times people that are closer to the situation are more right, but it's like you see the flaws more readily when you are close. If you were further away from Joe Milton, you didn't watch every snap he played like people in Knoxville did a year ago, or the last 2 years, what you look up and you see is what he went 10 touchdowns and no picks a year ago. He's like Uncle Rico. He can throw a ball over the mountains if he likes. And you sort of see the things that are allowed. I stood from me to, this wall in front of me to Joe Milton for about 25 minutes today, being Thursday. He's an impressive guy. He's a huge guy. And, he's well-spoken. He went to Michigan, which is not probably the easiest of public schools to get in. He presents a good image. He's very confident. Someone asked him about having maybe the strongest arm in college football, and he began his answer with, there's no maybe about it, basically. So I think if you were just looking at Joe Milton, I think someone asked a question, and I don't look at mock drafts usually this time of year, but apparently he's getting some first-round buzz, so that's out there too. I think it's like being married. You see the flaws in your spouse that other people don't see because you're with them all the time. And I think that's much like perception of players when you are really close to it as opposed to when you are further away. And the things with Joe Milton that were probably loudest were not the things that you see up close when you're watching him and putting him under a microscope, as happens in an SEC city. Is that fair, you guys think?
Listen, the media loves the long ball. and the man's got the long ball. And I think just the arm strength, you can see those highlights, and it's hard not to be wowed by it. I'm wowed by it every time I see him throw a ball. I mean, just, that far. None of us can do that. There's not many people we know probably in the world that can do that. And but it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? And he was asked that today, Chris, which we put the interview up with him. It's on our channel if you want to find it. He was asked, it's like, all right, the arm strength's there. Like, what else are you improving in? And where have you improved the most? And I thought he gave a pretty detailed answer. He's like, look, I feel like I've improved here. I've improved here. That's what's going to take if he's going to be, what maybe the national media, like Sam said, if he's going to be what they think he can be, he's got to improve in those areas. It can't just be, you can't. How many times is he going to have the opportunity to throw a 90-yard pass, right? I mean, you're not going to be in that position many times. So I thought he did give a pretty good answer on that. So if you want to kind of hear his insight, you can find it on the channel. So,
yeah, I don't know that we'll really, I don't know that we'll find out what Joe Milton's going to be until we get to the first, critical third down. I don't even know if it'll come in the Virginia game, because I think they'll absolutely stomp Virginia. And according to which, I'm going to go ahead and throw the little tease out here, our predictive model that we're working on for Southeastern 14, it generates not only what the spread should be, but also a predicted final score. That's coming up. Another reason to subscribe to the channel. But I just don't know. There's, the greatest predictor of future performance is past performance, right? And every time Joe Milton has been in a position to be a starter for a team, he has not finished the year as the starter for that team. The question is, can he change things and mentally be there? It's just like Carson Beck at Georgia. Same thing. Carson Beck has had multiple opportunities to be the starter over Stetson Bennett in the last couple of years. They tried to give him every opportunity possible to start, and he couldn't handle it mentally. Does he take that step in his fourth year in the program? And same thing with Joe Milton. Both are extremely talented, but how does it come through on the mental part? Because as Blake said, there's a whole lot more to play in the quarterback position. Anything else on that, Chris, before I put up the next question?
No, I'm done. We can go on to the next one if you guys are ready.
Yeah, Michael Phillips says, do you think that LSU's losses last year were first-year issues with personnel for Brian Kelly, or it is a pattern for him, like when he would lose big games like he did at Notre Dame? That's a great question.
I'll start there because I had a very interesting conversation. I won't name names, but it's someone on the LSU beat who I have a ton of respect for. And we were talking about practice access. And he said, I think Brian Kelly gave us more last year than we're probably going to get going forward. Because he said, I think he wanted us to come in and see how many holes his team had, which was interesting. And of course, they won the West and destroyed, Purdue in a bowl game, I think it was. And so I thought that was a very interesting take on it. And of course, Blake, as you know, that Brian Kelly was very confident going into this year. Georgia came up multiple times. I think he is a guy that has got LSU poised to take a big step and maybe even win a national title last year. But again, I put a lot of stock in what this person said to me, and I thought that was a very interesting take that Michael, in my mind, might answer your question.
Yeah, if you're asking me, I don't think it has anything to do with other than just it's the first year, and I think there's a lot of adjustments and everyone kind of getting on the same page, and I think we've seen that happen with teams all around the country. I think it's just kind of a product of getting everybody. I mean, look, and especially in this era, right? We talk about I think it was Beamer today talking about how many new players they have, 38 new players on the roster, and which again, they're not alone in that, but I think that stands out, right? In this era, it's just you have new players, and especially, guess what? Everybody's new when you have a new coach coming in terms of just having everybody on the same page. So I chalk it up to a 1-year thing, because remember where we all thought they would finish last year. Sure, there were some people higher on them than others, but I don't know that many people that had them winning the West last year. And so even for them to lose some close games and maybe be in a couple of those positions, I just think you chalk it up as a first-year thing, and I wouldn't read too much more into it unless unless you see a trend year to year, right? But we only have a 1 year sample size at this point. If you see certain things that stand out this year that you saw last year and they don't improve on it, then I think it's a fair discussion. But as of right now, I don't think you read a whole lot into it.
Michael, I'll answer your question simply as this. Will Campbell and Emory Jones Jr. were freshman offensive tackles last year in the SEC, and they still went to the SEC championship game, and they lost their best interior defensive lineman game 1 in Mason Smith. That was a unbelievable coaching job by Brian Kelly last year, even with a down game against Texas A&M, where they kind of just let it get away from them and played bad on the road. But again, you also have to give credit to that atmosphere. We can make fun of Texas A&M all we want to at different times, but Blake, Kyle Field is not somewhere you want to go. It is not a fun place to go play unless you're App State. They seem to like it just fine. But if it's an SEC game, they are those cadets are rowdy in there, the 12th man. So I think that now you're adding in guys like Omar Spates, who was a all Pac-12 conference player and was a guy that was on a Oregon State team, which I know we're an SEC show, but Oregon State was a really good football team last year, and Omar Spates was a reason for that in the middle of that defense. And now he comes over to play will linebacker for LSU this year, and then you add in some other key pieces that they brought in, like Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse, that's going to fortify things at the nickel spot. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to if you're LSU. I would argue maybe if you factor in the quarterback position, maybe the most complete team with the fewest questions in the SEC going into it, because that Georgia question at quarterback is still a big question. How is Carson Beck going to be? We know what he can be, but we have seen what Jayden Daniels is, and we figure he's only going to get better from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah, two quick things before we move on to the next topic. Jayden Daniels, one thing I was struck by standing face to face to him, that is narrow guy. Now, he took a pounding a year ago and made it out fine. I think he got sacked, 41 times, or maybe I'm confusing him with Will Levis. It was a lot. You pointed out LSU had 2 freshman tackles, and that was a problem at times. But it kind of struck me as I was sitting there watching him. Now, look, LSU's got some depth at quarterback. Garrett Nussmeier in particular, Blake or Blayne, probably I'm guessing your pick is maybe the best backup quarterback in the league.
He came in the second half of the SEC championship game and looked like Dan Marino.
Yeah.
I mean, he was out
there. But it struck me. Yeah, sorry. There's a little bit of a delay here, so when we talk over each other, that's not intentional. But anyway, it did strike me how narrow he was when I looked at him. Blake, you brought something up that sent me scurrying for the preseason magazines last year. Athlon picked LSU 4th in the West a year ago, and Lindy's picked LSU 5th.
Yeah, I don't know where we picked them, but I mean, it probably wasn't that high. So yeah, I mean, it's probably 4th, 5th, somewhere in there. So yeah, I mean here's a question for you, Chris. Did you fill out your ballot? Did you send in your all SEC ballot? Because I did.
I filled it out to send it in, and then I had exactly what happened to me that I'd warned about. Like, don't go away from the computer a while because it will time out. So I had it all filled out to send in, and then it's I've got to do that over tomorrow. But I did have a lot of LSU players on there and a lot of first teamers.
Well, what about your order of finish?
I had LSU ahead of Alabama.
I thought about it again, which we did when did we do that, guys? It was not that long ago, right? I think we made our summer picks or whatever where things stood, but I think we all picked LSU. But I thought about it and I kept thinking about it. And we made the joke this week, like the universe cannot allow Alabama to finish, second, right? 2 years in a row. But I thought about it. But the more you look at the rosters, like you guys have talked about, I mean, it's just LSU's roster. You can't deny what they have. And so, yeah, I submitted mine with LSU at the top. So there you go.
And we're going to have prediction videos. We're going to have all of that game by game stuff. Look, Justin Holland, welcome back, guys. Yes, the live streams are back. We're going to try to do one each week now going forward all through football season. So we're going to have something live going for you. Thank you, Justin. Welcome back, man. What are you drinking tonight, Justin? Because the more you drink, the better our super chats get. So Keep it flowing, man. We appreciate that. So before we go on to the next question, Chris, I did want to make a comment on your, the access to the media. You sure Brian Kelly wasn't just letting media know, hey, look on the sideline. There are no blonde bombshells in here. There's no faces that shouldn't be in here, so to speak. So just showing a difference between Edo and himself. So
yeah,
I think
that may have been a problem at other places too.
Oh yeah, maybe so. Tyler Koch says, will a veteran defense and a make or break year for Drinkwitz be enough to get Mizzou over the 500 hump? How critical is the quarterback position? Well, I'll say just it's a quarterback driven league, right? So you got to have good play at quarterback. And I think Brady Cook can be that guy for them. I know Garcia is there and is transferred in, and he's going to be fighting for that job. And also Sam Horn, who's a tremendous, baseball player as well for Missouri. He got hurt this spring, so he didn't get to have his full season in baseball. But there's a quarterback competition, but I think Brady Cook is the favorite to hold that job. But guys, what do you think? You heard a lot of Eli Drinkwitz talking about that defense and how good they were going to be. People would just flat out ask Eli Drinkwitz, what's one thing you're most sure about this season in interviews? And he said, we're going to be good on defense.
Yeah. I mean, listen, Chris, we did the preview. What was that? Probably 2 weeks ago. And just kept saying, I think we kept repeating the same thing. We're like, I don't know how you cannot look at this defense and feel like it's going to just be outstanding. Now, obviously injuries and that kind of stuff can come into play, but the defense, yeah, I'm as sure about the defense as I am of anything, just like, Drinkwitz, and he knows better than me, but I think it's easy just to look at this team. And you talk about filling out our ballots, Chris. I had a lot of Missouri defensive players in that group, which again, you're not just picking, one or two guys, you're putting kind of a pool of guys in there. And I mean, there's so many guys, right, that you just pick and put on there, and you're like, all right, he's got to go on there because he's one of the better defenders at that position. And I think we just look down the roster. I mean, that's what stands out with them. And so my hesitation with Missouri is, like you said, I hope for their sake they do find consistency at quarterback and can find, what they need and get everything out of Luther Burden that we think they can get out of him. And but as Blayne knows, and as we've talked about, is just when you lose a guy like Dominic Lovett, it's tough. I mean, it's tough on an offense that was already having some issues. And we think Luther Burden can take that next step. I'm interested to see how they use him this year. And they're going to have to use him in a variety of ways. And yeah, but it all comes back to the quarterback and whether you get consistency there. If you don't, it will be an up and down year where the defense is going to have to win you some 21, 17 type games. And if not, then yeah, it's just kind of trying to figure it out. But the one thing I will say, Chris, before, and I think we've talked about this, all of us have, that schedule though, man, it's not hard to find a lot. I mean, it's hard to find a lot of wins. When you just look at it, because usually we can spot some schedules, say, all right, guaranteed win. In the SEC, you kind of look at that sometimes with the non-conference games, not with everyone, but it's like we've talked about, right? Like Middle Tennessee is not a bad team. They go to Columbia, not a bad team. Kansas State, that's a top 25 team to start the season. Yes, it's a home game, but this is where drawing an LSU, right? Good thing it's in Columbia. Yeah, as Blayne always says, weird things happen there. That could be the weird game of the season. Could be the Tennessee game. But if you're just looking at their schedule right now, Kansas State, LSU, Kentucky on the road, at Georgia, Tennessee, got to go to Arkansas, South Carolina, Vanderbilt's going to be better. There's a lot of games on that schedule that if you don't have a consistent offense, you're going to be right there with a chance to lose, but you could also have a chance to win thanks to your defense.
Yeah, Justin, Deion's in rough shape with that leg. That's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough for him.
Just on that.
Yeah, so we'll see there. But no, I see what you're saying, Blake. I mean, the schedule, I'm looking at it right now. It is tough. But man, when you go through and look, like you said, it's 9 seniors. 9 seniors. You just don't see that in college football anywhere now, really. And only one of those guys is a transfer coming in this year. The rest of them are, and he's not even a senior. Joe Moore, the one of the defensive ends, he's a junior. All those seniors, they've been in that program. So it tells you they've been around Eli Drinkwitz. They know what how close they came in some of those games last year. I think it's going to be a very motivated team, and I think it's going to be a team that upsets a couple people this year, Chris.
Chris, I think I was going to say real quick on the all SEC teams. I think I had Darius Robinson, Tyron Hopper, Ennis Rakestraw, Chris Abrams train. I think they were all kind of in that pool of players, on the defensive side. Like I said, you're not picking necessarily 1 and 2 and all that, but I had them all, I think, in the pool of kind of ranking, the top players at those positions. They were all in there on the defensive side. So
yeah, Abrams, Drain, and Rakestraw would be. We get to pick 8 defensive backs. I will tell you that when again my ballot didn't go through because of a delay, I'll have to submit that again tomorrow. They were on my 8. Tyron Hopper will be on my list of what is it? We get 8 linebackers.
I think so.
I can't remember if I had Darius Robinson on my defensive line or not, but he was certainly one I thought of. And look, when you can name Joseph Charleston's a guy that's going to get all SEC run, when you can name a team's starting secondary in a league where, by the way, there's some pretty good quarterbacks this year, I think that's huge. Tyron Hopper was maybe the most underrated defender in this league last year. I think unless you were just really dialed into things in Columbia, I don't know how much people paid attention, but he was very productive. Guys, remember how bad that defense was a couple of years ago. These are the dudes that came in and turned it around. They've got Blake Baker, their coordinator, back, who did some good things. And to the Brady Cook question, it's funny. Sometimes you go back and you take a second look at things after having an offseason. I'd forgotten that Brady Cook was as mobile as he was a year ago. No, look, I don't think Brady Cook is probably in the top half of quarterbacks in this league who scare you. Certainly in terms of talent, there's some guys that I might rank under him that are probably more talented players. But when you can run a little bit and you've got that experience, he didn't throw a ton of picks a year ago. Maybe we slept on Brady Cook a little bit, but I think, look, there's a universe. I'm not going to pick South Carolina, or excuse me, I'm not going to pick Missouri second. But I think there's a universe if you play the season out 100 times, they'd finish there a few times. And I think a reason of it would be that defense was so good and so improved a year ago, and they've got so much coming back.
Offensive line should be better too, I think. That should help, I think, on the offensive side.
They've got Javon Foster, who's a potential LSEC left tackle. That's a nice piece to have too. Yeah.
Listen, they didn't push the ball down the field as much as I think they want to, but you go back and look at Brady Cook's stats. Only 2 games last year did he have a completion percentage under 60%, and most of the time it was upwards of 65%. So I mean, he had a really sneaky good year, like you said, rushing for 585 rushing yards last year at quarterback in the SEC. I mean, are you kidding me? That's pretty dang productive right there. So I think that he can take that next step and be the guy. I don't know if Garcia is necessarily going to beat him out, and I don't know that Sam Horn is actually a real factor in that race, but he certainly was talked about by Drinkwitz there. But yeah, it's a interesting deal to see some of these mid-tier teams, like you said, in the SEC, Chris. It's going to be in the East and the West. It's going to be back and forth on who kind of steps to the occasion here.
Keep in mind, they lost 4 games by a touchdown or less too. So, I mean, it's, that's where we talk about the difference going into a new season. Defense is even more experienced now with the guys they have coming back. Can the offense get better? If you win 2 of those games, right? How different's the discussion if you're sitting there, at 8-5 and okay, the program's had a breakthrough versus 6 and 7. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they, and then, who was it? I think it was Javon Foster, may have been Darius Robinson, talking about just, that's one of the things that he kept bringing up was this week was just the importance of finishing games. So,
yeah, I got a question for you guys. Was there a team that you entered in SEC Media Days thinking one way, and because of something you heard or some things you learned, you came out feeling another way about them?
Yeah. I mentioned there's a couple. I mentioned one of them earlier. The Petrino thing and Jimbo Fisher's answer really bothered me. And maybe you can say, hey, you're just looking for stuff to pick on A&M about. Not really. I mean, not a sense in that it's personal, but when you've got a situation that is that volatile, you kind of look for red flags before the season started. Again, I thought the way that he answered that question, I don't think he could have possibly answered it any worse. Will it mean anything? I don't know, but I don't know. I put some look, we talked a year ago when we did these things in July and August, and I think I'm the one that said, hey, look, guys, I know everybody's got A&M being world beaters and maybe challenging Alabama and talent this, talent that, but I said, look at that NIL situation, look at the hype, look at all the things that have happened there. That is a situation that is potentially combustible. I look for things like that. They don't always materialize, but I've learned, I've done this for long enough. I start looking for potential red flags, or at least yellow flags. And to me, that was one. My other one, Blake, and I don't know if you had came away with the same impression. And I'm not meaning to go after Zach Arnett here, but I've been kind of debating Auburn, Mississippi State. Which team do I like better? I probably got them battling that out for the last spot. Now, look, people have dogged us a little bit for picking Mississippi State last. And I will just say this. Look, I think every team in the West might be a top 30 team nationally. Somebody's got to finish in that spot. And so you look for stuff. And it was clear to me, one thing that crystallized as I watched Zach Arnett and Hugh Freeze speak, it was clear to me that one of them had been a head coach and one of them had not. And that was a thing that sort of, as I'm trying to go, because I've gone back and forth on those teams over the last few weeks. Again, that was sort of a tiebreaker of a win in doubt. So to answer your question, Blayne, those were two things that maybe nudged how I thought about some teams that I saw at media days.
So, I mean, I'm not just pandering to the audience here, guys, which, I never do that. But I think Arkansas, and, I was one that, we kind of all picked them, I think, in a different sort of spot. And I tell you, it's talk about just being in person, right? Sometimes getting that just one-on-one players, like you really just kind of see them a little bit better than you do than the guys that just have the helmet on and they're out here doing this. But to me, man, KJ Jefferson, like he has it, right? Whatever it is, like he has it, I think, just from a leadership standpoint. And I was so impressed kind of just being there and talking to him. And I'll tell you one thing too that stood out is we talked about that defense last year, right? And we know injuries were an issue. Think about how much all season we talked about just the consistency wasn't there, and it felt like injuries were part of that for sure. But Sam Pittman was talking about bringing in Travis Williams, and I laughed at the quote, Chris, which I'm sure you kind of remember some of what he said. But he's like, what was it? It was something about here. I'm going to find it real quick, but he said, man, they were cover zero a lot, and when I interviewed him, I said, hey, man, I want to go after people, but every now and then, can you just kind of leave a guy in the middle of the field sometimes? So like that kind of tells you that they're going to be aggressive. And I think that's something where if they can keep everybody healthy, that was one of the biggest questions we had. But also, Chris, we also heard the Rocket Sanders part, right? And he was asked the question, saying Pittman brought it up, but it's like, this guy's gained 10 pounds of muscle and he's faster. Like he's running faster now. And I think he was talking about kind of the ways they feel like they're going to use him in this offense now, with Dan Enos there. And so I think Arkansas is a team that, again, we all kind of talked about their, maybe, I don't know if you should identify them as a sleeper team or whatever wording you want to use. But if you're talking about one of those teams at the West that I think that can really, kind of jump up based off of some inconsistency last year, I was really impressed with KJ Jefferson. I think you can tell Sam Pittman felt really good about, I think he said 19 additions they brought in the transfer portal. Felt like they addressed every single need that they had, which I know coaches are going to say that sometimes. It's not always going to be the case. But I was really impressed with I think, just the entire, unit there of Arkansas. And I do feel maybe a little bit more confident about what they could achieve with, again, that it's always difficult. And Blayne, I know you can probably speak to this when you talk about just adding new coordinators, and there's a change there. There can be an adjustment, but I sort of feel like, hey, maybe they've got the right guys here. And specifically, I think when you look at the defense, that's a big part of it. So.
Oh yeah, no, I think everything you said about Arkansas, correct. And then, Dan Enos, I don't think Sam Pittman could have been any more effusive in his praise for Dan Enos. Yeah. I mean, he was really over the top pushing him. And I think I heard Rocket Sanders talking in an interview saying that the people were asking Rocket Sanders, hey, what do you think you're going to see differently out of KJ Jefferson, and Rocket Sanders just came out and said, hey, he's going to throw the football more. Like he's going to put it down the field more. So I think that the style is going to be a little bit more different, and it's going to look a little bit more of what KJ Jefferson could look like at the next level to show a little bit this year. Chris, I'm going to push back a little bit on the Mississippi State thing because they're the one team that I came out feeling better than I felt going into it because of how I heard Will Rogers talk about this offense and what he's going to do, because he said in interviews that, listen, in the air raid, I saw drop 8 all the time. He said the windows were about this big. He said I was constantly having to fit stuff in. He said now with the 11 and 12 personnel and them having to bring guys down into the box more, he said I'm going to have bigger windows and we're going to take more shots. They didn't throw the ball down the field because there was always 3, sometimes 4 safeties, deep. I mean, it was straight across the board, deep corners, deep safeties back there, and he was having to find the underneath stuff. I think you're going to get to see Mississippi State, who, yes, they lost Ra Thomas to Georgia, but they still have talent there. Jaden Wally is there. LaDedrick Griffin, who is quick as a hiccup, man. I mean, he can go in a hurry and is a deadly in the return game. He's there. Justin Robinson, big body guy. They got Rufus Harvey coming back. So there's some talent there at receiver, and then they're adding that tight end element. I think Jaquavius Marks is a really good player. I'm not sure about the offensive line there, but what impressed me was how Zach Arnett talked about, hey, it helps when you've got 2 guys that had over 100 tackles at linebacker coming back in Jet Johnson and Nate Watson. So I think that's a team that I feel slightly better than. I'm not saying that it's going to reflect necessarily in the record even, but I just feel I was coming into this portion of the season feeling like, wow, Mississippi State's in trouble, but then go to feeling like, okay, because I thought it would be such a huge adjustment from air raid to pro style, but to hear Will Rogers, the guy who's pulling the trigger, say, I have more space to throw the football now, that just changed something for me with hearing how he thinks a little bit about that.
He also had an excitement in his voice for the play action. He said, give me that play action, man. Running more play. Give it to me. So, yeah, he was excited. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I didn't get to hear that conversation. I was actually, when I don't know if Blake was the one.
Hey, Chris, you know what? You know what?
What?
You can watch that conversation on Southeastern 14 YouTube channel, courtesy of Southeastern 14. There you go.
Right. With all the abundant free time we had this week, I say that sarcastically.
All right, Chris,
not yet. I was actually across the room
right now,
talking to his chief underneath target.
We got a super chat.
And look, the defense of Mississippi State, I think, starts with that. Like, okay, they've changed offenses, but Will Rogers has played a ton of football. Smart kid. Having a veteran presence at quarterback like that is always a plus. And then the line, look, I mean, Johnson and Wheat were probably 2 of the top 4 tacklers in the league a year ago. That's a big plus too. But again, sometimes we're looking for reasons. Maybe that was a reason of convenience when you've got a bunch of teams close. But we're going to hit Justin's question here next, I suppose.
Yeah, super chat from Justin. As appreciated as always. And guys, if you see that little logo beside Justin's name, that's because he's a member here. He joined, and then also we have to thank Joe Dawson who joined. He's a new YouTube member, so you can become a member of this channel and support all the stuff that we're doing, and we greatly appreciate that. But the super chat from Justin was UT's season a fluke last year, or are they back? So is Tennessee back, or do you think last year was a little bit of a flash in the pan?
Buy.
Bueno?
I buy it. I think.
Oh,
I mean, they won 10 games. They beat Clemson. They beat Alabama. There was the South Carolina game. They were outclassed against Georgia. That was probably a little more lopsided than the score. But goodness, the rest of the body of work. They're recruiting at a high level. They've got a system. They've got NIL. I don't think that Tennessee is going to go back to, the dregs of the Butch Jones and the Derek Dooley days anytime soon. Could be wrong about that. It was just 1 year, but I mean, the year before they were 7-6, and I thought that was, sometimes there are 7-6s that aren't impressive, and I thought that was one that was.
Can I give you my answer after we see what Joe Milton looks like in Game 3 at Florida?
Yeah, but they've got a guy behind him too, potentially.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying, like, I think are they back? Yes, I think they're back. Like you said, if that's just the simple part of it, I don't think they're going to go 5-7 or I don't think that's going to be the case or anything. But are they going to be able to match last season? Remains to be seen. I think if you just look at it from that standpoint. But yes, I think they're back from a standpoint of I don't expect Tennessee to all of a sudden drop down to the 5th or 6th team in the East or anything like that. So.
Well, 2015, Butch Jones 9-4. 2016, Butch Jones 9-4. 2019, Jeremy Pruitt 8-5. I think you could see something very similar to that this year. So my question is that back? I mean, is 8-9 wins back for Tennessee? Because I don't know that you're going on the road to Tuscaloosa. I don't know that you're going to beat a Georgia team that is, by all accounts, the best team in the country coming in there. And then who knows what happens in a couple of these matchups. We know what Kentucky can be this year. We know that, we just know we've just talked about Missouri. We talked about is South Carolina better? There's all this kind of stuff. If they lose 3 games in the regular season, Chris, is that considered back?
Well, you make a fair point. And I guess I didn't realize. Well, I did. Butch Jones had a couple of really good teams. To be fair, I thought Butch Jones was going to be the guy that got them turned around. Now, it looks like a stupid take now, but I was a believer in a lot of what he was doing at the time, and then it fell apart. And sometimes that is a pressure cooker in Knoxville. It goes crazy there pretty quickly. There are just some places where it can go off the rails pretty quickly. Gainesville's one, Auburn's one. Really, that's the case at just about any SEC school, but you've seen it happen in those cities repeatedly. But one thing that sticks out to me when I watch Josh Heupel, guys, if I'm going to just go pick out who's the most normal guy of the 4 coaches we just talked about that have been the last 4 at Tennessee that you just would go have a drink with or go bowling with or whatever, I think that the guy that's in the head coaching chair there right now is that guy. He's also got an offensive scheme that is almost impossible to stop. And to me, that is why that's different. I could be wrong. They could be back there in a couple of years and it implodes again. But to me, this feels different than the other 2 did.
Yeah, maybe so. I could definitely see Josh Heupel playing. Bowling. He looks like he could really bowl. Like he looks like bowling is his sport instead of being a former college, runner up for the Heisman. The body transformation is unreal. But when you go through here and you look at it, I think you got to ask yourself, what is the standard at Tennessee? Is the standard being what Tennessee was in the late 90s, early 2000s? Or is the standard having a chance to win double-digit games? So, that we'll see. We'll see what happens. This might be our last one here. We got SC Scout guy says, is South Carolina a consistent 8+ win team under Beamer? Y'all go ahead, and I will bring the point home.
Oh dear. Even tell you, I'll say this. The one thing, Chris, that I've got in my notes here from Shane Beamer, the one quote he made that made me a little hesitant, and I don't know if I don't think every coach says this, to be honest with you. I haven't heard Kirby Smart say this and a bunch of others, but the one phrase he said, and you may have it in yours, Chris, he said, we expect to play true freshmen at, I think he said every position, but I just kind of said, all right, he probably means a lot of the positions, right? I don't think he expects it at every single position, but it's kind of what he said. He's like, look, and that goes back to what I said earlier, 38 new players on the roster. So I think they're one of those teams that maybe have, I don't want to say necessarily a ton of questions, but I do think it is one where it's understandable that they, as a staff, may still have some questions entering fall camp. Of course they do. So I thought that was an interesting comment, but can they consistently do that? Well, that was one of the messages he talked about, right, Chris, was just the consistency and trying to make sure they were more consistent on offense. And he talked about specifically, which we talked about a lot last year, guys, the Florida to Tennessee game, the big difference there, right? Like how different that was. Don't score an offensive touchdown, score 63 points or whatever. So it's going to be interesting. Not easy to be a consistent 8-win team in the SEC, is it? And we'll see if South Carolina can do that. So.
Yeah, I could argue both ways. I really could. And I think South Carolina, if you want to look at diversity of outcomes over the next 10 years. I think that Carolina would be one of the teams that the range for wins there might be as large as anybody in the league. For different I think they're a confusing team. You go back and look at some stats, they didn't always add up. I think last year, even though they finished inside the top 25, had huge wins over Tennessee and Clemson, the stats underlying that didn't always back that up, and they lost a couple corners. But Blake, I'm gonna plant my flag here with Carolina. If I had to make a choice, this is where I would go. I would think that 8+ wins, I mean, schedule permitting, right? Sometimes you get one of those brutal schedules, and my goodness, they got one of those this year. But I think, are they an 8-win type team? I would buy it. And one of the reasons is, look, we're all dads here. And so I sort of look at things through the parent lens. And I just was thinking, as I sat there and I watched every coach speak, if my kid one day is a blue chip football player, and I'm going by nothing other than just watching these guys speak at media day, who would I want my kid to play for? The 3 names that I think I wrote down that stood out were, and maybe in this order, but I liked all these guys for different reasons: Billy Napier, Shane Beamer, Sam Pittman. I just felt there was a relatability factor with all those guys, and that's just me. Everybody could process it differently. But there's a lot in Shane Beamer's personality that I like and that I'm buying. And when that's your leader, that means a lot.
Yeah, that's because you're a nice guy, Chris. And you like nice guys. And Shane Beamer is a nice guy. He likes nice TikTok views, nice YouTube views, nice all this kind of stuff. I don't know that he's got to decide what kind of. You talk about parents. He's totally different than his dad as a coach. I just don't see it being the same. I think there has to be listen, he's young. He's still young for a head coach. And I think there's got to be a maturity on his part to get South Carolina to where they consistently be an 8-win team. I think there was too many instances, and I'm not just talking about having fun on social media and stuff like that. There was too many instances in which he was questioned by media and stuff like that, and flew off the handle, like the emotions were everywhere. And that even happened sometimes in games, the emotions, the swing of emotions. And you can't have that as the leader of a successful program. So I think that's one thing that has to change. And I look at it this year, opening up with a tough North Carolina team, that's going to be tough. They got Georgia week 3. They got Tennessee at Neyland. They got to go to Columbia, Missouri. They got to go to Kyle Field, back-to-back weeks. They got Kentucky coming into town, and they do have Clemson coming into town. But, man, it's going to be hard to get to 8 wins this year. And if we're saying consistently get to 8 wins, I don't know. I don't know that it's not necessarily a Shane Beamer thing as much as it is the SEC is really hard, and now you're about to add Texas and Oklahoma into it.
Justin, thanks for reminding me. Dennis Gates, I forgot contractually, Chris, I have to mention his name in every video I do. Dennis Gates. All right. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate you, man.
Yep. So we have, this is our live stream. We're going to be doing one of these. Our goal is to do one of these weekly, at least one, and talk SEC football. We want to be as interactive with you guys as possible. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell your friends, be a friend, tell a friend. And we love covering SEC sports here, and we hope that you'll tune in each and every week and watch all the great content that Chris and Blake put out. So, Chris, send us home, man.
Chris, you're muted. The Oreo mute is on.
The Oreo mute is on. Let's do parting thoughts on anything that maybe we didn't get to that we want to wrap up with. I'll go Blayne, Blake, and then I will close.
We didn't even talk about Kentucky and how good they're going to be. But I thought I was the only one. I thought I was out on an island. But, man, I heard these people that wear ties and suits and were on TV all week talk about how good they think Kentucky's going to be. So I don't know if that makes me feel good or bad that the pundits are catching on with that. But Kentucky's going to be good, Blake.
We got 38 player interviews up. We got a lot of team previews up. We'll finish those up next week. So I think we still got Alabama, LSU, A&M, the 2 Mississippi schools. We'll have it all up there. Schedule previews. We'll do game-by-game predictions. It'll all be on the channel. So my parting thought is just please hit that subscribe button if you want. Enormous amount of SEC football content.
Yeah, and my parting thought relates to that. We talked to a lot of players this week. Again, we had 38 videos up. We would divide and conquer. So I was not in front of all those players that are on our channel, but I'll tell you a couple of guys that I was in front of that I really enjoyed speaking with. One was Cedric Von Prawn, Georgia's center, who was an art design major. I wanted to ask him about that. Like, I don't know how many SEC football players are art and design majors. This probably comes as no shock. Georgia players went a lot of demand down there. Sometimes you couldn't get in a question, but I really liked talking or being around Cedric Von Prawn. I thought he was an interesting dude. The other one, I think maybe the most entertaining media session I've seen this week. And again, I didn't see all the ones on our channel, but I probably will go back and watch a lot of those. I don't know that I've ever seen a punter at media days. Kai Kroger for South Carolina was there. We had 20 minutes with him, and I asked about 5 minutes of questions at the end, just stuff about special teams and punting. He gave some really good answers on why Carolina's good at special teams, just had some funny comments here and there, just a very personal guy. I could see him being in our profession one day, but really enjoyed that one. I think that was, of all the players I was face-to-face with this week, that was probably my favorite. So, especially if you're a Carolina fan, check out the Kai Kroger video on our channel. Anyway, all right, guys. Thank you to our audience for watching. Thank you to Caroline Smith. She was at Media Days with Blake and I. You don't see her on camera. She helped us out with a lot of these interviews. She was a real asset to us behind the scenes this week and really appreciated her work. Meant to get that in towards the front of the video, but I'll get that in now. But in any case, thank you for watching. Again, we're going to do a lot of these this football season and the run-up to football season, which starts next week with Vanderbilt's practices in week 0 preparing for that Hawaii game. So we're going to see SEC teams hit the field and practice this week, so it's almost here. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. We appreciate you guys all watching, and we'll see you again soon at Southeastern 14.